Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus the 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are Māori broadcasting warlord Matthew Tukaki, Labour Party candidate for Tāmaki Makaurau, Kerrin Leoni, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton. Tonight's 1-on-1 in 10 is recreational fishing champion Matt Watson on his beef with Shane Jones, why the new fishing legislation is so problematic, and who is the trouble here, recreational fishers or commercial fishing, and a special extra 1-on-1 in 10 with leading economist Cameron Bagrie on the Iran war's impact on our economy and what he thinks happens next. Shout out to Kiwis, Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the fourth estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's week 5 of Donald's illegal war on Iran, and President Trump has emotionally swung between cutting deals with top people to threats to obliterate Iran. He's like a heavily indebted crypto bro who keeps buying the dip only for it to go lower while not completely understanding what crypto is in the first place. Every day that passes gets closer to America and Israel running out of interceptor missiles before Iran runs out of drones, meaning Trump is thrashing around, launching some madcap military adventure that dangerously escalates things before those interceptor missiles run out, because that's what this fiasco needs right now. Escalation. Violently doubling down like a psychopath might work with New York property developers. It doesn't seem to work with zealots fighting for their theocracy. Here's a cheap joke, and we are the expensive punchline. Talking of war, Bishop Brian Tāmaki fears that our military is too femme. Bishop Brian Tāmaki, channeling a frost otter leather daddy vibe in that picture, wants the rainbow taken out of the New Zealand military by complaining on Twitter that the New Zealand Navy allows makeup, nail polish and fake eyelashes. Apparently, this makes our warriors too femme for the bishop's liking, which when you consider the Mad Max fuel crisis we are facing seems like the least of our problems. The New Zealand Navy can wear glitter balls and high heels for all I care. I say go 100% femme. Lots of eyeliner and pronoun camouflage. This could be the dumbest thing Bishop Brian Tāmaki has ever complained about, or it could be a brilliant new strategic edge for the New Zealand military. Queer eye for the military guy, making conflict fabulous. And finally this week, Police Minister Mark Mitchell says that while cocaine use is up 98% and meth use is up 300%, drug enforcement policy is working. Which is quite a statement to make, because if cocaine use up 98% and meth use up 300% is winning, I'd hate to see what losing looks like. It seems to have come as a surprise to the minister that banning gang patches didn't actually ban the gang members as well. Mark Mitchell is to the war on drugs what Donald Trump is to Middle East diplomacy. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with recreational fishing legend Matt Watson. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora. Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's anywhere I can get my voice out at the moment, I will gladly take it. Thank you very much.
Amen. Preach. Matt, my mum, my brother, and all my dads love you. You are a fishing legend, a sustainability campaigner, and passionate ocean advocate, and it's a pleasure having you on here tonight. Your beef with Shane Jones has become an important front line between commercial interests and the recreational fishing community. When you first heard that the new Fisheries Amendment Bill would allow commercial fishing to sell undersized catch, what did you think?
I actually thought that it was some kind of a joke. All because, you see, before that point, we'd already looked at the Fisheries Amendment Bill that had actually been released publicly. And there was already some really egregious stuff in there.
Totally.
Like legalising fish dumping, removing penalties for fishermen fishing over quota, a whole number of things that are really murky. And I want to really be really clear here. This wasn't released. There was no press release saying, oh, hey, by the way, we're adding this ridiculous notion that commercial guys should be able to take baby fish before they can breed. That was actually just slipped into the bill. And the bill was released without notification on a Thursday night with the hope they'd be able to read it the next Tuesday. So it's only that we've got a really keenly organised group of keen recreational fishers at Legacy. It's a self-funded group that were literally waiting for it to come out and combing through page by page to find it because it was hidden in there. And we found a whole bunch of other horrible stuff as well. And I believe the minister didn't put that in there because it really spells out how one-sided it is. And the blessing is that we found it and that it's very easy for Kiwis to understand. You know, because it's a real murky business, this fisheries legislation, and it's hard to engage people on it. Well, this has engaged people and it has brought them out, man. I'm so proud of Kiwis letting their voice be heard.
That undersized catch rule has been overturned, but there are many other deeply problematic elements of this Fisheries Amendment Bill. It will allow more destructive bottom trawling. The public will be limited from public consultation on fisheries decisions, and it blocks public access to the footage from cameras on boats. Who is this law being written for? The protection of our fisheries or the interests of commercial fishing?
Well, I think that's pretty obvious. You know, it is unashamedly being put forward by the minister, Shane Jones. He's even used the words like benefiting my friends in the seafood industry. And let's remember, our Minister of Fisheries, not all that long ago, was the board chair of Sea Lords.
Right.
So, it did raise a lot of eyebrows in the recreational fishing community when he was appointed Minister of Fisheries. It's like, can no one see the clear conflict here?
Yeah.
And when you're looking at where the political donors are coming from, the big seafood companies, you're like, surely is there not a conflict here? Well, then when the bill was announced, the minister stood shoulder to shoulder with the CEOs of the big seafood companies. And that is when we, the New Zealand public, found out that this reform was going to happen. Yeah. Like, New Zealand First did not campaign and say, we are going to rewrite the fishery. They didn't.
That's right.
We've got a list MP who no one gave a mandate to, saying, right, going to his friends in the seafood industry and saying, what do you need? And well, he's done a good job of serving their needs.
Hasn't he?
He has. This will make it easier for them to catch more fish and remove barriers and remove transparency. You mentioned in your intro there the removal of cameras. And there's this notion that's been pushed back by the minister saying, well, no one else have to have cameras in their workplace and we've got to block this because of privacy reasons. Oh. Well, people aren't harvesting a public resource when they're in the office.
That's right. That's right.
The New Zealand public have got a right to know how our precious moana is being treated.
Yes.
Because it belongs to us.
Public
and when we've taken a snapshot at some of that footage, because the current system and this blows people's minds, allows the fishermen to dump fish overboard.
Yes.
And that's perfectly edible, saleable fish. I'm not just talking about the little ones.
Yep.
Because they can make an economic decision.
Yes.
Oh, we may not have enough quota for this one. We don't want to pay the fine, whatever. We'll throw it overboard. And so for the quota management system to work, we need to know how much fish is being thrown away.
Exactly.
Because, and we can't know because the camera footage is being blocked, and they said, oh, we're just going to estimate it and we're going to tell you the truth. Well, in the little bit of footage that was sampled, an important species like kingfish was 9 times higher than what was being reported.
Shit.
So the whole system can't work without some real transparent look at that footage. And that is just one of the things that remains in this bill.
Yeah.
And I almost would say it's a bit of a red herring, this undersized snapper thing.
Yes.
You know, they're all coming out saying, oh, look, we're going to get rid of it. Don't worry, nothing to see here. Well, there's plenty to see. And as long as I've got air in my lungs, I'm going to be telling everybody that we've got to keep going because we've already made a difference.
Preach. Public sources suggest that New Zealand First and Shane Jones have received over $100,000 in donations over the last decade from the fishing and commercial industry. Is it problematic for a political party who receives that level of donations from an industry to then legislate in a way that directly benefits that industry?
Of course it's wrong. Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely wrong, particularly when it is a public resource.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. On social media, people have sort of complained about, I mean, how much we pay for fish in New Zealand. And it is ridiculous when we're exporting like kahawai, beautiful fish, being exported for less than $2 a kilo.
Yeah.
Well, Kiwis are paying up to 15 for it. It's and 90% of our fish is being exported. And so people are saying, oh, it's like the price of dairy, you know, it's not on. The difference is farmers actually put inputs into the land. They care for their land. They raise their own cows.
Yes.
And if they do a good job, they'll make more dairy or they'll make more meat.
Sure.
Whereas I say to you, what's the seafood industry doing to grow more fish and make sure there's more there?
Yeah.
And it's a publicly owned resource. So I say the conflict there is huge and it is egregious. And it's been, and when people say, well, prove that he's, I've been challenged to say, well, prove that he's doing it for his mates in the seafood industry. I said, the Fisheries Amendment Bill proves it.
Right.
He wrote it, and he also said it.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
The new laws go so far as to rule that anyone who publishes footage from cameras on boats that show environmental damage or breaches of the rules will be fined $50,000. So not only is the public locked out of public consultation, we aren't allowed to see the camera footage, and anyone who publishes footage highlighting abuse by commercial fishing will be fined $50,000. How outrageous is that?
You think of all the serious crimes happening around New Zealand that have got far less penalties against them than that. And that is a really good example of how this legislation, where there's been issues with the way we're harvesting our fish, instead of identifying the issue, saying, what can we do about it? And I'm pragmatic as well. Yep. There's not overnight fixes on everything.
Sure.
Instead of saying, well, let's just change the law to hide it, or let's change the law to legitimize it. That is what all of these amendments are about. None of them are addressing the real issues, which is we've got a depleted fishery and we're using destructive fishing methods.
Yeah. I've already decided that if this law passes, and if I get sent footage off the cameras showing environmental damage or illegal catch, I most certainly am publishing it, and I'll see Mātua Jones in court. Want to be a co-defendant?
I'll tell you what I will do is I'll give you $50 to your GoFundMe.
Thank you. That's what we need. That's what we need.
Look, you could end up making a tidy profit.
Many in the recreational fishing community do it to feed the whānau or for the mental health well-being of enjoying being on the water. I've never seen the recreational fishing community as the problem when it comes to overfishing. I've always seen the commercial fishing industry as the problem. Do you feel that the recreational fishing community are held up to a higher standard than the commercial fishing industry is?
Well, already we've got size limits for a start. And even under current laws, they're larger than commercial limits. And now I've always advocated that two wrongs don't never make a right. And the individual, I would say to anyone listening, if you go out and gather seafood, just take enough for a feed.
Totally.
Don't take more than you need.
That's right.
Utilize the whole fish. Don't waste any. But what I will say when people call out, oh, I saw this rec guy doing this or that. Yes, that may be true. But recreational and customary gathering amounts to 5% of the fish that come out of our ocean.
Exactly.
95% are caught commercially. So yes, while neither side may be perfect, I would say if we want to restore abundance, let's start with the 95%.
Exactly.
And I would never warrant anyone, even if it's a single fish, taking one more than their limit, taking something that they don't need, or just being disrespectful with the fish they catch. We've all got to have our own accountability, but it's been pitted as a rec versus commercial. It's not. Both can thrive. And what underpins all of that is a healthy marine ecosystem. And I think that if all the stakeholders at the beginning of this legislation were invited around the table and to say, look, here's our vision for a sustainable fishing future where we've got a really thriving commercial industry, where some of the control goes back to the actual fishermen as opposed to the big companies, the quota holders. And we've got a thriving recreational fishery and economy. I mean, what's been left out of this whole conversation is because we've been battling all of these fires, is that the recreational fishing economy generates $1.4 billion in economic activity every year for taking that 5% of fish. So it actually stacks up by volume better than the seafood industry. So that's not been considered. And what definitely hasn't been considered is the things you mentioned, just how good we feel, the disposition of everyday people, how much they can unload and unwind the stresses of everyday life. By going to the source of our kai, grabbing it and providing fresh, wholesome, healthy food that nourishes the belly, but is really good for the soul too.
Amen.
And that has not been accounted for in any of these decisions.
Finally, Matt, we are seeing climate change impact ocean temperatures with a speed and intensity that is only getting worse. What do you believe that we need to be doing moving forward?
We need to be putting the environment right up there in terms of, particularly something like fisheries, whereas that is the origin of not only all of the economics that comes from it, but also the well-being. And the trouble with a lot of these things is if you follow the money, in this instance with fisheries, a lot of the shareholders, quota owners, they aren't on the water themselves. And I think a lot of the commercial fishing operators themselves, the guys that own the boats, but not necessarily the quota, they're sort of being hung out to dry because they're very visible with their boats. The thing is when you've got the people that are profiting the most, having no real connection with the sea, having no real understanding, they just want a dividend payout. And then so when they're asking for a dividend payout and the ocean can only produce so much, well then, how are you going to do it? You're going to take more fish. Well, we can't take more fish because they're running out. Well, let's take smaller ones. Let's not invest in doing it better in sustainability. Let's invest in the minister.
Thank you, comrade. All power to your arm, Matt. Keep your lines tight.
Thanks, mate.
Be well, my friend. Be well. The political panel All-Stars up shortly, whānau, but now this week's extra 1-on-1 and 10 with leading economist Cameron Bagrie. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Good evening.
Cameron, you were one of the first economists in New Zealand to warn that this fuel crisis had the capacity to have a far larger impact on the economy than many were predicting. 2 weeks ago, you told Radio New Zealand that New Zealand could experience a real fuel choke point in a fortnight and that Treasury's worst-case scenario for inflation was too optimistic. We are 2 weeks in. The choke point you predicted is in front of us, and Finance Minister Nicola Willis acknowledged yesterday that the worst case 3.7% inflation prediction was again, as you called it, too low. What do you believe happens next?
Well, if anybody can give me a firm view on the Strait of Hormuz or when this situation is going to sort of settle down, we can throw some concrete numbers around. But at the moment, in all honesty, we're whistling Dixie.
Right.
So it's all about risk planning, risk management, scenarios in regard to what's going on. But yeah, the Treasury, when they came out 2 weeks ago and said that worst case scenario was 3.7% inflation.
Yeah.
Like, what on earth are we smoking?
Right.
There was no way you'd put that on the table. So we've moved on now. Yeah, I see Westpac, ASB have now got their central scenario.
Yes.
With inflation up around 4%.
Yes.
And that's a central scenario.
Right.
So there's risks around that, both sides. Could be higher and it could be lower. So it's a bit of a throw of the dice.
How does the Houthis in Yemen threatening to close the Bab al-Mandab Strait impact that supply constraint gridlock?
Well, it just accentuates that, the market view as of 2, 3, 4 weeks ago.
Yes.
That this was going to be a short, drawn-out affair, not too much of an economic impact. Oil prices temporarily spike, oil prices go back down.
Yes.
Now we've got a second choke point potentially.
Right.
You've got Hormuz, but potentially if the Houthis get into the act as well, and you've got that narrow strait, you've got another potential supply shock in the making. So this thing, well, even the talk of ground troops going in.
Right.
If you put in ground troops, that's not a weekly affair. That's a couple of months minimum.
Yeah.
So this is a serious disruption that's going to take a little bit of time. And what we're now starting to see is that financial markets and even the oil market is now starting to think, look, this is not one and done.
Right.
This is going to take a little bit of time potentially. So the more the duration elongates, the more the economic consequences on the other side.
The Iranians say that they are prepared to fight for 6 months. What does 6 months worth of diesel, petrol and jet fuel disruption look like in New Zealand?
Well, it's not just New Zealand, it's around the globe.
Yeah.
Because you've got pretty severe economic damage. So you'd imagine right at home, Donald Trump landscape, higher petrol prices, people are not going to like it.
Yep.
Inflation goes up, cost of living goes up. So voter approval is going to go down. So this is going to be a worldwide issue in regard to what's going on. So Iran's they've got strength, right, in some areas.
Yes.
But the United States is still the strongest military around the globe.
Of course.
It's still the biggest economic sort of superpower. But as we know from Afghanistan, as we know from what happened in Korea, as we know what happened in Vietnam, is what the Roman Empire has learnt when they went into sort of Persia.
Yeah.
Buyer beware in regard to what you try to bite off.
What happens if the private sector in New Zealand hasn't in fact stored enough diesel, petrol and jet fuel as they were obliged to? We've seen Shane Jones sending out warnings to those private sector groups. Is it something you are concerned about, that their numbers are actually not as solid as they suggest they are?
No, I think they'll have those supplies, because if they don't have those supplies, then they get pinged pretty heavily.
Right.
The issue is whether those supplies are sufficient if supply dries up on the other side.
Right.
So just a little bit of context, right? What you've got at the moment is that Korea, who supplies 47% of our refined fuel product, has now just issued a wartime budget.
Yes.
They're exerting restraint.
Yep.
When I see countries such as Korea, effectively moving to a level 2 sort of situation as a comparison to where we've been defined, it sort of begs the question, well, if they're at level 2, what's going on here in New Zealand?
Yeah. How much of a wake-up call is this in terms of the need to electrify our economy and industry?
Well, it's not just a huge wake-up call in regard to electrification, because we've known about this, right? And we're heading down that route. But the big wake-up call here, I think, is a basic, simple principle, because the ability to take and manage risk.
Right.
Right, because we've made some decisions in regard to Marsden Point.
Yes.
We've made them decisions in regard to knocking the oil gas industry on the head.
Yes.
What we have not acknowledged on the flip side is the ability to take and manage risk on the other side of the equation.
Do you think New Zealand's
And
good at
guess
that,
what?
Cameron?
So,
Do you think New Zealand's good at working out our risk profile?
well, I'm going to say something I wouldn't normally, sort of use because there's a sort of a curse word here. We're bloody awful at it.
Right.
So if you ever look at what's called capital productivity, which is the utilisation of your capital assets to drive growth GDP, the average on that for the last 30 years has been minus 0.3% per year.
Right.
So we effectively build stuff and then we mismanage it. And you can see that across councils.
Yep.
You can see that across roads. You can see that in regard to just how we manage. We build stuff.
Yes.
And then we don't manage it appropriately. And then we've got to throw a whole lot more money in regard to rebuilding the goddamn stuff. And the taxpayer pays twice.
The executive director of the International Energy Agency described the current situation as a worse energy crisis than the 1970s oil shock plus the Ukrainian war combined. Are we underestimating the impact of what's coming?
Well, look, I'll actually take my hat off here. Like Nicola Willis has done a really good job in the past 10 days in regard to stepping up.
Yep.
And I've been quite critical in the past of their tax policy, that sort of stuff. So, I'm going to give a little bit of credit here in regard to what's been going on. But look, the reality is that we're reliant upon Singapore, we're reliant upon Korea and Malaysia, and of course they're reliant upon stuff that comes out of Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
And that stuff's shut down.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got a problem pending around the corner. At the moment, we've got stuff. But middle, end of April, what's the space in regard to what goes on? And I've been rather amused with the stories we see across the media in regard to the impact of higher petrol prices.
Yes.
So that's secondary. The key thing here is diesel.
Right.
We consume more diesel than petrol. That's like the lifeblood. You've got to it's the trucks, it's getting stuff from A to B.
What happens if we run out of diesel? What happens? I mean, this is so new for so many people. What happens if we run out of diesel, Cameron? What happens then?
Well, you can't get stuff from A to B. Right, your export sector shuts down.
It's that serious.
But we will not end up in that situation because we will take preemptive action. And the government has been right to have the alert level system look 1, 2, 3, 4. My personal view is that we should be at the moment at level 2.
Right. You think we're behind it? We're not getting in front of this?
No, I think we're a little bit slow, right? But there's no free lunch here.
Sure.
Because if this thing settles down in the next sort of 24, 48 hours, then maybe you've made a wrong call.
Yeah.
But I'd be pretty conservative here in regard to what's going on.
Finally, Cameron, what do you say to whānau who are just holding on from the cost of living crisis and who are now about to get kicked in the ass by this fuel inflation? Should they feel angry at the technocrats and political leaders for the state of this?
Right. Well, that's a great line that you said about, do we have a cost of living crisis? And the answer is yes, but the real crisis is that we're having an income crisis. Well, the problem is not that stuff is going up in price. The problem is New Zealand wages.
Right.
Right. And when you don't have sufficient higher income, which is a function of productivity growth, then guess what? You get a cost of living pressures, then the money doesn't go.
Right.
So let's break it down into something pretty simple. Income's a function of productivity.
Yes.
Productivity in New Zealand is basically Zippo. So we've got an income crisis. When you've got an income crisis, that exacerbates a cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
So yes, let's talk about the cost of living crisis, but the real problem here is an income crisis, which is a function of productivity.
Thank you, comrade, for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. Many whānau listen to you and you have been ahead of the game on this debate from the very beginning. Thank you, Cameron. We'll talk again to you shortly.
Take care.
Be well. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin and is the only New Zealand right-winger not on the Taxpayers Union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Exciting, because I'm a political junkie and there's a cabinet reshuffle and there's quite a few lame duck ministers, so there's a whole lot of interesting portfolios out. You got Judith Collins going, so that's what, Defence, Attorney General, the spies, what else? The public service. You've got Brooke Van Velden, the Labour Minister. You've got the Universities Minister, Shane Retty. You've got the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon. So you've got these sort of four ministers who are...
I noticed you just kind of slid that one in. You just slid that one in.
Lame ducks. And so there's a lot of interesting portfolios up for grabs this week.
Our next panellist is a former Auckland mayoralty contender and now current Labour Party Tāmaki Makaurau candidate, Kerrin Leoni. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora. Good to be back.
Thank you so much for joining us. So excited to have you here. One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
It's got to be struggle. It's got to be struggle street at the moment. So many of our whānau are really struggling with this cost of living crisis. I know that we've just talked about that, but the reality in West Auckland, South Auckland, whānau are really struggling, and we need to really look at that advocacy.
Preach. And last but certainly not least, he's the Māori for all seasons, broadcaster and raconteur, fresh from the Tova O'Brien TVNZ breakfast interview this morning, the working class anvil that is Matthew Tukaki. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Fishy. Fishy. Now, look, I used to clean the Sanford's Fish Factory at Sulphur Point in Mount
No way! No way!
So I know a little bit about the fishing industry. I used to clean the shop, the fishing trawlers. I used to do all the dirty jobs. Now, the fishing industry contributes about $5.2 billion
That's right.
to the New Zealand economy. 16,500 jobs.
Yes.
So I get what Matt's saying about the $1 billion that recreational fishing brings, but the truth is there are a lot of jobs, a lot of complexity wrapped up in this. Look, I'm not going to get into the allegations around whether Shane's beholden to the fishing industry or not, although plug for fish fingers. And so, I don't know if that makes me a heathen or not. But look, Matt, a couple of Matt's points really have stuck with me, including, some people that hold quota are not present in the fishing industry.
Yeah, that
itself.
was interesting.
And
that was a really interesting
that's
point.
right. About 26% of fisheries are held by Māori interests.
Right, yes.
Now, that money that goes through that quota system into iwi Māori hapu significantly contributes to the running of marae, to our kohangas, to kura, to social services and all sorts of things. So I would hate to think that people can't get in a room and sort this out, because I've read the legislation, I've read the amendments, I've been through the whole thing. It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's not easy. But I'd also hate to think that this is a war between recreational fishers and the commercial fishing industry, whereby one of the losers in that war, if you like, could potentially be Māori and the Māori economy.
Exactly. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, Iran War, Week 5, economic and political ramifications. And Issue 2 tonight, police regaining powers to record Māori youth again. Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show, which each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money's on Tukaki. Let's kick things off with Issue 1, and that is Week 5 of Donald's illegal war in Iran, with the enormity of what this crisis actually means downstream to us. Matthew, last week, the Finance Minister of Aotearoa looked down the barrel of the camera and told us the worst case scenario was 3.7% inflation. Yesterday, the Finance Minister of Aotearoa looked down the barrel of the camera and told us that last week's pronouncement of worst case scenario actually wasn't the worst case scenario after all, and that the worst case scenario is so terrifying that she won't actually tell us what it is. Has the government woken up to the criticism you've been making in your Friday columns in terms of the enormity of what is about to hit us?
Well, I think they're taking a much more serious line now with the announcements that have been made by Nicola Willis and Shane Jones, who have been doing a very, very good job on this. Nicola has sort of brought the seriousness to the situation that I think was lacking. And yes, that original Treasury forecast that she quoted, she's probably right not to quote anymore. Because as she said, look, even the Treasury doesn't stand by its work.
Wow.
Because things it's not because things are so uncertain.
Right.
So they're saying to her, look, we've given you these numbers. You can do what you like with them, but, they're going to be wrong, which is fair enough. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And I think Shane Jones seems to be very focused on establishing new lines of supply.
Right.
And, I think a case can be made that we should still be at level 1, as we are, because New Zealand doesn't have any storage capacity. So if we started relying on rationing systems other than price for diesel now, well, where would you put the surplus? It's not like we have a just-in-time system, so we don't have big areas to store oil in New Zealand. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's the fact. But it is, I think, good to see Nicola and Shane deciding to focus. Well, this could well last now for months, and if we can't keep getting oil from Singapore and Korea, what then?
Follow-up question. While we face what the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency has described as a worse energy crisis than the 1970s oil shock plus the Ukrainian war combined, while we face that, the Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, was cutting ribbons at Christchurch Stadium. Is National's crisis management strategy to wheel the Prime Minister as far away from the fuel crisis as is humanly possible? Will he be visiting school children in Ashburton next?
Well, I think there's been a difficulty with the Prime Minister for some time on a range of issues, but specifically on this, that right at the beginning, he had a reasonably sensible position on the foreign policy written for him by Winston Peters and senior officials, which he was unable himself to communicate. And I think in press conferences where he has attended, including one last week, and also the one on Monday where he's been with Nicola and or Shane, he hasn't had much to contribute to that conversation, and really. It's led to some of the press gallery quite unkindly, I think.
Very unkindly.
I mean, God forbid, saying, does he have a role other than to be Nicola Willis's press secretary?
Yes,
because he kind of just directs the questions.
Does he?
Well, it's a difficult question that you put there. I think that the key point is that it's not a good look for a Prime Minister not to be able to contribute at their own press conference.
No.
So probably if you're a government and you're in that situation, it is best to be running it through Nicola and Shane. And I think that's the strategic decision that's been made, and that's, under the circumstances, the right one.
Kerrin, $50 a week to the deserving poor, while caregivers, teacher support, beneficiaries and pensioners get a kick in the ass. Is that cold shoulder what Kiwis expect from their government during a crisis?
Yeah, and I think, what's been raised is really clear, is that lack of real clear leadership for our country right now. That's what we need. We know that this is going to go on for months. It can be going on for months. We don't have an indication of what the peak of that crisis could look like. No. And that's what we need to be focusing on. We need to be aware as a country of what that peak could look like and where we're heading, basically. But I think just coming back to that $50 and, earlier today I was listening to the comments made by Mr. Wayne Brown and the free transport, and I actually have to say, the $50 weekly cap on transport in Tāmaki Makaurau is still not really known across the city.
No, it's not.
So central government should be really pushing that. given that we've got the highest population here in Auckland, and there's a $50 cap. A lot of Aucklanders do not even know. Remember, 70% of Aucklanders didn't vote.
That's right.
So are they actually keeping up to date with what's already in place and what they can access? Do they even know how to upload an Auckland Transport app onto their phone?
Exactly.
Should they decide to catch public transport? Because these are all the practical things that we should be talking about right now as alternatives while we're going through this fuel crisis, and even considering 4-week working days. I know there's some organisations that are already kicking into gear to have those discussions. But again, all these practical things that are not even being discussed.
Government's not leading.
No, we need that leadership, and that should be coming from the top.
Follow-up question. National have built their election narrative on Labour overspend on COVID, and that's led to a political paralysis on behalf of the government. But if things get as bad as Matthew Hooton is predicting, won't voters demand more from the government in terms of support?
Look, I think that they are going to demand more in terms of support, and I think Labour has been able to provide that in the past. So we have to go off the track record and history that Labour has been able to provide, and I know that we've had that leadership, and it's been clear and it's been strong, and I think that's what New Zealanders are looking for now.
Matt Matua, Shane
Labour
Jones.
never provided anything. The bond markets provided the money.
Matua,
it didn't come from the Labour Party.
Matt Matua Shane Jones was blitzed by 2 articles today highlighting his and New Zealand's first role in not following through with more diesel storage capacity. If things get worse, that blundered decision will get magnified. Can today's revelations damage New Zealand First politically?
Look, I think we've got to get over, just like the current government needs to get over what Labour did or didn't do during their time in government during the COVID-19 response. What we've got to do is project a plan forward, and that's the only thing that matters right now, because this is a moving feast. I mean, the reason you don't stand by the Treasury advice is because they themselves know it's a moving feast. One quick example for that is actually fertiliser. And I mentioned it a couple of times this afternoon in another forum. We're fixated on diesel at the moment, and the supply is definitely in demand and probably going to dwindle.
Yes.
But actually, we also get a significant amount of our on-farm fertilisers from the Middle East as well.
Yes, that's right.
And so we can go to plastics, we can go to the fact that oil is and all sorts of different things. So we've got a real problem coming down the line. And just because petrol prices have gone up rapidly doesn't mean to say that they're going to come down rapidly. So all of these different things about forecasting, trend analysis, etc., that's where I'd prefer they cohabitate around instead of this cockamamie nonsense of potentially parking large tankers offshore, and that's going to increase our storage capacity. Let's move on.
Follow-up question. By refusing working from home mandates, lowering speed limits from 100 kilometres to 80 kilometres and ruling out free public transport, this government has abdicated common good solidarity for free market price points. What happens when none of the users can pay?
Well, I think the problem that the government's got is a real problem that's faced by other governments around the world as well. How far do we go to mandate? Because that word mandate is a scary word post-COVID-19, right? So that's the first thing. And people are psychologically damaged by that, and I get it. But the problem is then go to the other extreme where you're hoping that the market, i.e. consumers, business, whomever, are somehow going to step in and themselves do the mandating, like working from home or whatever. The reality is it doesn't matter which way you dice this current crisis. It was days in the making, and it's going to be probably months in the ending. And so I think there needs to be a finely tuned balance towards this. I get worried when I start hearing murmurs out of the Reserve Bank about the inflation number. That worries me. I mean, even though it might settle at around 3.7% on the original prediction, the reality is we're probably looking at 3.7 to 4.2%. And when you have a look at what's going on in Australia with the latest figures out in their economy, when Australia now coughs, we get a cold.
Yes.
And that's also another reality of it.
Quick round, worst case scenario for inflation, Matthew Hooton.
Well, as I always say, it should only be 2 because the Reserve Bank should respond. But looking at what the bank economists are saying, 5, 6, who knows? It could be as bad as it was when it got to 7 after the COVID spend up.
Jesus. Kerrin, what worst case scenario?
Yep, I agree. It could be getting up to the 7, and we don't want that, but could happen.
You were right last time about inflation going up. Where do you think it's going to go now?
Oh, look, I definitely think the figures are now conservative at between 3.7 to 4.2%. I think we are probably heading towards that COVID number.
Where will unemployment be if inflation is over 5? Where's unemployment?
Māori unemployment is going to stick around 13 to 14% probably. I would have thought, given the fact that on the analysis that Māori unemployment is traditionally higher than non-Māori.
That's
so
right.
there's that aspect of it. I think the other worrying feature here, though, is that we're going to see increasingly more New Zealanders potentially falling into that longer-term unemployed category, and we're also going to see a lot of New Zealanders fall into that more casual, part-time, underemployment category. So they're major concerns.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the new surveillance powers the police are trying to sneak in to the move-on powers that they lost in 2020 after an outcry against the photographing and interviewing of young Māori on the streets. Kerrin, the move-on powers are controversial enough. That is, that's like, well, I really don't know if this is going to be. But sneaking in new powers to legally film and interview young people to get around 2 previous rulings that limited that. How is that helping solve homelessness, which is what this piece of legislation is supposed to be about?
Yeah. No, look, I think there's huge concerns about it because we don't have enough information on it.
Right.
So look, I agree it does need to go to select committee, but that's where the detail around the questions that we need to raise need to be raised there because we don't have enough information, and all of those things need to be raised in that room because, the move-on orders have just, I think they've been a shock to so many Aucklanders in terms of, putting our rough sleepers into prison, a $2,000 fine. It's really not going to solve the issue. Actually, it's just, at the end of the day, I'm saying that the taxpayer is going to spend so much more money because we know what the cost is of putting someone into prison, when that money should be going into wraparound support services for them to go into some secure housing and wraparound support. No, huge advocate for youth homelessness and youth that are going through these difficulties. We know it's all intergenerational issues as well.
Right.
So that resource around crime prevention should be targeted in that area.
Follow-up question. If this is about moving on the homeless, why aren't we talking about body cams on police to ensure that interaction is safe and legal? Why is it selective videoing by the police that they're allowing?
Yeah, again, look, I think, disagree with how this is happening. So I look forward to the debates that'll be happening in that select committee because we've got to make sure that the youth have got their rights and the youth are heard.
Matt,
hang on. You're getting a bit fishy here because we started at the top of the hour talking about surveillance cameras on fishing boats.
And now we're on the police. Matt, no one seemed to appreciate that police were using this off-book intelligence network photographing in 2020 and that it was considered crucial enough to regain under the move on legislation. If the police need to interview a teenager, there are existing legal processes for that. Why are police circumventing those processes?
Look, I think 3 things. Number one, as a general rule of thumb, we should not surveil our citizenry to the extent that is being proposed.
Right.
There are cases in history and examples through history that surveillance has been used to suppress the citizenry, and I don't agree with that at all. Also, we should not criminalise homelessness at all on any level. Instead of throwing a quick fire solution out like criminalise them and sentence them and give them a fine, we need to solve the housing crisis that we so clearly have in this country. Look, the other aspect about the legislation is that it's a consequence of the police being found out for having done what they did. So that's a cultural thing, that's a policy thing, it's an internal operational thing. It's not something that we legislate the problem away. We need to resolve the issue of what's going on in the New Zealand police. And a lot of people would argue very strongly there are well held issues of cultural integrity within the New Zealand police that still need to be resolved.
Right.
Yep.
Follow-up question. Should police be able to interview teenagers without legal protections or an adult support
Oh,
person?
hell no. Absolutely not. There should be no country on God's green earth, and I'm not even a religious man, that should enable police or law enforcement to interview underage young people, teenagers, in a circumstance without a parent, guardian, or legal representation present.
Matthew, the Privacy Commissioner is very clear in his criticism of this legislation. He says it permits collection of people's information for an intelligence purpose which is not defined and establishes a low bar for police to meet. How can a bill legalising the arrest of the homeless also manage to breach teenagers' legal rights?
Well, the important thing, if this proceeds, and it's something for the Select Committee to get the right balance, and the government says this is its intention, is that it certainly has to be related to a offence or a likely offence, and it applies to everyone. While the controversy 6 years ago involved Māori teenagers,
yes,
what's proposed here will apply to everybody.
Yep.
And both the Labour and National parties and the police union and the police itself say, well, they agree something has to be done here, and they have supported this to Select Committee. The Greens and ACT have more on the in the extremes, have more ideological concerns about it. I'm sure the Select Committee will get it right in the end. And it's interesting, though, when do people become adults? I mean, it's a very difficult thing, but the age of childhood seems to extend, yet at the same time as the age where people act autonomously falls, it seems to me, and you've got this gap. The SIS says of the threats to New Zealand it's concerned about at the moment most.
Yep.
It's not the Chinese, it's not the Iranians, it's not the Russians.
It's young teenage boys.
It's the manosphere, and it'll be white supremacist Trumpoids, and I don't know. Do you say, oh, that person's 17, so the police can't talk to them unless mummy comes along?
No, look, I'm sorry, but no.
I don't know.
Jump in here, Tukaki.
I'm sorry, but
go for it. You jump in.
When the coppers turn around and they are taking photos on their cell phones of under 16-year-old teenagers, that is a child,
right?
And I don't give two shits what the coppers' excuse was for that. They were doing it without the knowledge of all of us and everyone, including the parents. And if they hadn't been found out, they wouldn't have admitted to it. They still haven't done their penance, and as far as I'm concerned, they can go and shove something right back upside them.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Matt, your final word this evening is, Mr. Tukaki.
Well, peak fat.
Let's hear it.
I have reached peak fat.
Peak fat, yes.
I've been crook for a little while, and I've got bigger and bigger and bigger. Had to learn to walk again, had to learn to talk again.
You did.
Didn't need to learn to eat again.
Yep.
But now that I've reached peak fat, I'm going to do something that Duncan Garner should have done ages ago. You told me I was going to breach the defamation law. And that is get on that tricycle and start losing some chuff. The Men's Health Week, which is coming up. Thank you, Mark Sainsbury and the crew. So join me in the peak fat journey.
Awesome. Kerrin, your final word this week, please, ma'am.
Oh, look, I'm always about the positive mental health and well-being, so I'm just going to say positivity for the week. We know, like I've said before, a lot of our whānau are struggling, but getting out there and doing that exercise and being part of something bigger.
Peak fat.
Yep. I'm on that journey too.
Matthew Hooton, your final word this week, please, sir.
Well, it's a bit dull because it's so repetitive, but for fuck's sake, what happened when the American people elected Donald Trump?
He beat me. He had to leave it to the end. He beat me.
I mean, really and truly, this person was obviously completely unsuited to the role. He somehow won the. Well, and it was obvious all along.
Yeah.
The idea that he is the leader of the party of Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan is just preposterous. He had no idea what he was doing. The US may be the 7th form boxing championship that thinks it can take on a scrap with the 4th form brat, right?
Yeah.
But if the 4th form brat doesn't care how much it hurts and isn't prepared to follow the rules of boxing, the 4th form brat is going to win. And Trump is in this situation where he's now saying that opening the Strait of Hormuz may not be a war aim. So I don't know what the war aims are. Because what he might do is at some point declare victory with the strait closed and the Iranians say, oh, cool, go away then, you finish bombing us, because the Iranians don't care how many of their people are killed because they kill them themselves.
Right.
And the Iranians may have permanently destroyed the US-led economy and therefore US hegemony. So from even the point of view of the most pro-American individual, how have we got to this stage? I don't know. Presumably things will be worse next week when we talk next Tuesday.
Preach. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, the shocking attack to cut 25% in budget to iwi radio stations could see as many as 30% go under at a time when climate emergencies are increasing. Losing vital parts of communication during extreme weather events will put lives at risk. It's not just the importance of emergency broadcasting. This is an election year. Implementing budget cuts that could see 30% of the 21 iwi stations collapse is a slap in the face to what is the oldest treaty settlement outcome. To attack some of the best flax roots Indigenous Fourth Estate journalism in an election year when anti-Māori and anti-treaty rhetoric are the policy agenda is a political move as much as it is a budgetary measure. We need more funding for media, including Māori media, not less. The need to have journalism that abides to best journalistic standards in an age of social media disinformation and misinformation is not a nice to have. It is the basic pillar of a democracy. Silencing critical voices with these budget cuts may not be the stated aim, but it certainly will be the outcome. There is much to be genuinely angry at with this terrible government, but cutting the funding for critical media while putting communities already on the front line of climate change in more danger must be near the top of that list. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.